in a parachute to glide. I am captive in your sky. Surrender is somehow become so beautiful. Take control of the atmosphere. Take control of the atmosphere. You can take our world, you can fill the air. Take control. Take control. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender. We'll be through the darkest clouds, till lost in the sun, every shadow of doubt. There's no better find than to find myself in you. In a fog, you're all I see. I'm inviting you closer with each time I breathe. Surrender is somehow become so beautiful. Take control of the atmosphere. Take control of the atmosphere. You can take our world, you can fill the air. Take control. Take control. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender. Such a beautiful surrender.
Jesus is critiquing the zeitgeist, or the spirit of his time and culture, in this passage. And he uses an analogy to shed light on this zeitgeist. He says, "What shall I compare the zeitgeist of this generation? They're like children sitting in the marketplace." Now first, Jesus is implying immaturity here. Children are immature. That's not a bad thing. I mean, that's part of the natural and divine rhythm of the universe. You aren't born a mature human being. The whole intention of life is to grow up, to grow and mature. So when Jesus says in another passage that adults need to become like children, what Jesus is encouraging adults to do, among other things, is to be like children in that they are aware they need to grow and mature. And not only are they aware, but they actually desire to grow and mature. Most children want to grow up. They want to get bigger and stronger and faster and smarter and be able to do things that adults do, like drive a vehicle or go to bed whenever they want. Immaturity isn't a negative thing here unless you don't want to grow or mature. And that's what Jesus is pointing to here in the zeitgeist, the spirit of his time and culture. The adults in his generation are not growing and maturing into the adults that God has called and intended them to be. But more than this, Jesus describes them as sitting in a marketplace. I think this is interesting. There's two things that happen in a marketplace. Things are bought and sold, and idle conversation. That's what happens in the marketplace. And I think if Jesus was using an analogy today, he would say, you're like children on your screens, on the internet, buying things off Amazon and having idle conversations on social media. But Jesus gets even more specific here in describing the zeitgeist of his time and culture. He says, you're not only like children sitting in the marketplace, you're calling out to one another. Hey, we played the flute for you and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge, a sad song for you, and you didn't cry. There's two things Jesus is highlighting here, I think. And the first thing is this: the zeitgeist of his time and culture is about complaining. Everyone always finds something to complain about. Nothing is good enough. Now, complaining is toxic behavior. It's toxic to relationships, to joy, to gratitude, to growth. When we complain, we're actually disconnecting from spirit. We disconnect from the divine flow of spirit into our lives. Complaining isn't a fruit of the Spirit. In fact, it's actually a rejection. It's an active resistance to the Spirit's presence and activity in us. The Spirit's presence and activity in our lives brings us fulfillment and peace and joy and contentment and abundance. And to choose to complain is to resist and reject the gratitude, the peace, the joy, the contentment that the Spirit is pouring into our lives. Now I'm preaching to myself here. I come from a long line of Scottish complainers. We can complain with the best of them. You throw us into a good time, we'll find something wrong within 30 seconds tops. I'm not bragging. I'm telling you that I need to hear this message as much as anyone. Now, complaining seems harmless. I mean, it's some people's favorite pastime. Let's get together, complain, and gossip about people. But it's not harmless. Like I said, it's an active resistance to the presence and activity of Spirit. And what Jesus is highlighting here is that to complain is to participate and reinforce the zeitgeist of the world, the spirit of the world, as opposed to participating in the spirit, the zeitgeist of Christ. That's the first thing Jesus is pointing to. The second thing Jesus is highlighting about the zeitgeist of the world is an immaturity in how we relate to one another, how we interact with one another. And when you really dig here, you see that Jesus is revealing that our expectations on other people is the root problem. You see, what are these people calling out to one another in Jesus' analogy? Hey, we played an upbeat song for you, but you didn't dance. We sang a sad song for you, but you didn't cry. Jesus is speaking to the human condition here, that we naturally expect other people to hear and see and respond to things the same way that we do, or the way that we expect them to. If something makes us really excited, we expect it to excite others. If something breaks our hearts, we expect it to break other people's hearts as well. If something's really important to us, we expect it to be important to the people around us. And if something is really urgent to us, well, now it's urgent to the people around us. We really struggle with people not seeing the world and issues the same way we do. I mean, most progressive liberals, they cannot understand how someone with a heart and a brain could be a conservative. It's just unfathomable. And most conservatives can't understand how someone with any level of common sense could be a progressive liberal. It just defies reason. This is the human condition, Jesus is saying. We have a hard time understanding when people see and hear things differently than we do. But this is the zeitgeist of the world. And this zeitgeist gets compounded and amplified in the church when you bring God and religion into it. I mean, how can a follower of Christ not be advocating and supporting this social justice issue? I mean, they can't really be following Jesus and deny this obvious social justice issue. It doesn't make sense. Or on the other side, I mean, how can someone claim to be a follower of Christ and not take the Bible seriously? The Bible is very clear on this issue. I don't know how you could be a Christian and not be accepting what the Bible clearly states about this. This is the zeitgeist of the world. To expect other people to see and hear and respond to things and issues the way we do. Yet Jesus has called the church to model a different zeitgeist, a different spirit, a different way of relating to one another. In fact, the way we do community, the way we do life together is supposed to be the hope for this world. But let's be honest, I mean, the zeitgeist that Jesus is describing in his time and culture 2,000 years ago is the same as the zeitgeist of the world today. It hasn't changed. And that's on us, the church. I mean, our primary call, our mission was to show a different way, to model a different zeitgeist, a different way of doing community and relating to one another. But we lost this as our mission. It became less of a priority. The intention of Jesus for the church was not for the world to notice and agree with what we believe, but to notice and envy the way we treat one another, especially those who are different than us, and especially when we disagree. Our beliefs were never intended to be what attracts and compels people. I mean, the Christian beliefs were a stumbling block to the Jews and an offense to the Gentiles in Paul's day. And that hasn't changed. Trying to get people to see our beliefs are right. That was never the mission of the church. Our mission was to embody the zeitgeist of Christ so the world around us could see how we interact and behave with one another, especially in conflict, and see not that our beliefs are right, but to see that the way we love is right. Anabaptists understood this better than most, in my opinion. That's why I chose to leave my tribe and to travel with the Mennonites. Now, Mennonites are weird. Now, they're not any weirder than any other Christian denomination, but they're not any less weird than other Christian denominations. But what drew me to join the Mennonite, the Anabaptist tribe, was I saw that they actually prioritized this mission of Christ. They were actually working at modeling a different way of being community, an alternative zeitgeist, the zeitgeist of Christ. Okay, so what is the zeitgeist of Christ? Well, it comes back to this passage. So the zeitgeist of the world that Jesus is unpacking here is when we expect other people to see and hear and respond to things and issues the way we do. That's the spirit of the world, Jesus says. When our expectations on other people is greater than our love for them, nothing changes. All that we are doing is reinforcing the zeitgeist of the world. But when our love for other people is greater than our expectations on them, that is when we manifest the zeitgeist of Christ. That's when we embody the Spirit of Christ. That is when things change. When your primary approach towards others is that they see the world and social, political, economic, moral, philosophical, theological, and ethical things the same way you do, you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution, not Christ's solution. But this doesn't mean you can't have opinions and convictions and beliefs and causes that you're passionate about. Of course you do. That's not a problem. The problem is when your expectations on others to see and hear and respond to things and issues the same way you do is greater than your love for them. That's the problem. The Apostle John makes this explicitly clear in his Gospels and in his letters to the churches. He says, "By this we know we have passed from death to life if we have love for one another." This is how you know you are in the truth. This is how you know you are living in the Spirit, if you love one another. The core commandment Jesus gives his disciples is, love one another as I have loved you. Now, there will always be disagreements. And in most disagreements, someone is right and someone is wrong. But that's not the most important issue. Being right isn't the mark of being in the truth. Being right is not the evidence of you walking in the Spirit. In fact, the need to be right is usually evidence of walking under the authority of your fallen ego or your false self or your pain body. But the evidence of walking in the Spirit and truth is not in being right, it's in loving one another. When loving the person you disagree with is more important to you than convincing this person that you're right and changing their mind to see things your way, when a group of us choose to live this way, we become the body of Christ. We become a manifestation of the zeitgeist of God on earth. We become the hope of this world. The hope that the zeitgeist of our current age can change, that there is another way. Now, that doesn't mean we don't disagree. And it doesn't mean we just agree to disagree. And it doesn't mean we don't stand up for justice and our convictions and our passions and for the rights of others. All it means is this: the primary goal, the primary task, always, no matter what, is to love one another more than we expect others to see and think and respond to issues and things the same way we do. Now, you may be wondering, what do I mean by love? And I'm tempted to use a sermon full of words and ideas and concepts and analogies and quotes, but I've already done that many times. So instead, let me ask you, what would it mean for you to love someone you passionately disagree with? Let's make it real. Think about someone in your church community. I want you to have a specific person in mind, someone that you kind of despise. Now you're probably thinking, Troy, I would never despise anyone. How dare you? Okay, well, think of someone who really annoys you, really rubs you the wrong way, or someone who has a social or political or theological agenda that you are wary of. Maybe you see it as not only wrong, but maybe dangerous. Or just think of someone, the person, that you would least want to spend a whole afternoon listening to their views on the world and life. Have that person in your mind. Spend time with that person in your mind, but not too much time, because what I want you to do is move that person from your mind into your heart. Into your heart. And now invite God to love that person through you and in you. Ask God to love that specific person in your heart and hold that person in God's love. Hold that person in a spaciousness of God's love in your heart. This exercise is probably the most important spiritual practice we can be engaging in if we want to fulfill this primary mission that Christ has given us. This exercise is really about letting the Spirit of Christ take over, letting the Spirit of Christ take control, because your mind, your ego, your false self, your pain body wants to do and say all kinds of things to that person. But instead, hold that person in your heart and let the power and authority of Christ's love. Love that person in your heart. Feel God's love. Allow God's love for them to become your love for them. And then try to live that way. That's what Jesus is talking about. That's the zeitgeist, the spirit of Christ. That's the alternative way of life that changes the world.